Hello, everybody, and welcome to another one of CPDSO's weekly webinars. We are so happy to have you with us today. People coming in, people are currently coming into the live room and still coming into the waiting room. So I'm just letting everyone in. I hope you're all settled. I hope you all have a cup of water, a pen, and a paper, because today's session is going to be really, really great. Today we have with us Richard and Andrew from Scotwork, and it's really going to be a great webinar today. It's going to be all about negotiations. So negotiating for sales in the era of COVID. So it's not just about negotiations, but we're going to be putting a little COVID slant on it as well, because we're all in that under that umbrella at the moment. So please do, like I said, have your paper and your pens ready, and also keep yourself hydrated, or maybe get a cup of coffee if you're feeling a little sleepy. We do have people joining us from all over the world, so wherever you are, if you've just woken up or if you are staying up, please do keep yourself refreshed. Without further ado, let's move forward. So a quick recap on housekeeping. If you're familiar, I may sound like a broken record right now, if you are familiar with our webinars, but I have to go through it. I can see right now there's a couple of videos on. I can just ask you, or if you can please turn off your videos, I'll be much appreciate that, because I am going to have to come in and actually do that manually. So please do just turn off your videos for me. It'll be much appreciated. Just to recap over the chat etiquette, the chat is open. I do want you all to use it, but please use it appropriately. Today we are talking about negotiations. So anything regarding negotiations, I'm more than happy for you guys to type away in that chat. Especially questions. So at the end of the webinar, we will be taking questions. There will be a Q&A, and you have both Richard and Andrew, which are veterans of negotiations, to answer your questions. So please do take advantage of this. Get your brain fired up from now. Any questions that you do have, note them down on paper, or you can even start to put them in the chat right now. So please do. I'll be monitoring it through their presentation. So please do feel free to put them in there. You don't have to wait to the end to put your question into that chat. So yes, that's it. That's the housekeeping. I hope you paid attention. I can see all of the videos are actually off, which is a first. I'm very happy with that. Thank you, guys. Moving forward. So just a couple webinar polls quickly, just standard procedure. We want to look at, we want to kind of find out what you all want from us, but first we want to find out what your status is with us. So are you a member or are you a non-member, and are you thinking about joining, and so forth. So let me just run this poll quickly for you guys. It should be coming up on your screen right now. So if you could just put in an answer for me. I'm going to be leaving it up for another 10 seconds, so please answer as fast as possible. Thank you, guys are coming in. And also there's another question. How many CPDSO webinars have you been on as well? Thank you guys for that. And then just one more poll now before we move forward. What topic would you want us to talk about in coming weeks? So that poll is now live. Obviously, please do let us know what you would like us to be talking on in the coming weeks. So we have 4 choices here. We have how to increase your digital portfolio, how to win new business with digital etiquette, the power of communication, and overcoming the mental health implications of COVID-19. So please do get your answers in. Leave that up for 5 more seconds for you. 3, 2, 1. Thank you guys for that. Appreciated. Okay, fantastic. So our time today is going to be a 50-minute webinar, 40 to 50-minute webinar presented by Richard and Andrew, who are both from Scotwork, which is a global negotiation specialist consultancy and training organization. They take normal people like myself and turn them into negotiation gurus So I do have my pen and my paper right here next to me, and I will be taking notes because it's a great skill to have, not only for sales, but for the whole of life, I'm sure. So Scotworks have coached over 300,000 people in 26 languages across 105 countries. I need not say any more on that. That's amazing. So recordings will be available after this with slides as well. So the slides and the recordings will be available. So if you do have to leave early, if we do slightly overrun, don't worry, you will be getting a copy because you was here. So you will be getting a copy of those of the webinar recording. And so here we go. Let's get into it. We have Richard Savage. I've got to say, first of all, I love the name. I must say it almost equals my name, almost. And I can't say that very often. My name's Daniel.steele, so it's quite powerful. So Richard, I've got some competition now, which is good. So yeah, Richard is a director, senior consultant at Scotwork. Prior to that, he was an entrepreneur for 30 years, dealing with brand development, strategy, marketing, retail intelligence, and has founded several businesses, including shopper experience companies, retail research and intelligent business, working with brands, including, so it's not any little names, including the likes of Chanel. We probably need to talk about that afterwards, Richard. Might need a couple of your links there for my future wife. Samsung, Tesco's and Audi. So it's a nice roster there that we have. Mr. Savage, in his family life, he's got three children, and in his spare time, he's a cook, he's a chef, a pilot, sailor, golfer, and he's a skier as well, which is fantastic. So that's Richard for you. And then we have Andrew as well, who's going to be taking the second half of the talk. He's the director of UK, senior consultant, negotiations, has dominated his life work from the beginning. He started out with Scotworks in 1997. Quick maths, that is, I think, 23 years. 23 years. And he started from the bottom, and now he's here. So he's moved up, and he's advising clients in the media, financial services, FMCG, and luxury goods, sectors across the UK and worldwide projects. And he's currently trying to master tennis, which is great. I'm a little bit of a tennis player myself, so it would be good one day to maybe match it up and see who's worse. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Richard, who's going to take the first leg of this what proves to be a great talk. So please, over to you, Richard.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. I hope everyone can hear me okay. That's the most memorable introduction I think I've ever had. Brilliant. So good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's CPD's webinar. We've entitled it Negotiating in Uncertain Times, and indeed, uncertain times they are. Before I get started, I just want you to answer 4 quick questions on the poll, which if Daniel is very kind, he will stick it up on the screen now. And there are 4 questions, so you'll need to scroll down on here. The first one, just to lighten the mood if Daniel hasn't already done that geniusly, is I'm interested to know whether any of you have ever worn pajamas on a video call, more than once, only once, never, or not prepared to answer the question for the more cautious amongst you. There's then a slightly more serious question, which is, do you think data in your negotiations since the start of the COVID-19 crisis is more reliable, less reliable, or about the same as before we got into this current situation? We're interested to know how the current situation has impacted on your level of trust with both suppliers and customers. Are you about the same? Do you feel a bit more nervous about those relationships? Or you don't really feel like you can trust anybody in this current time? I'm deliberately excluding the government currently, you understand. the other thing we'd like to know is, are you more or less confident about your business's prospect post-COVID-19? So when we emerge into what we're calling at least the new normal, do you think you are more confident about the future, less confident, or about the same as we were? We'll just let that run. We've got 70% of you voted so far. So that is good stuff. I'm just going to make a little note of some of the statistics on here. Quite amusing. I'm relieved to hear that 22% of you have worn pajamas more than once on a conference call, but none of you are shy enough to refuse to answer the question. In terms of the rest of the data, well, we'll come on to that as we go through. I'm just making a quick note of these numbers, if you don't mind, because Daniel is running the poll for us. And finally, we get 47, 28. Okay, no massive surprises, I have to say. What I'm going to do is just end that poll there. Thank you very much for completing that. Just helps add a little bit of richness to what we're going to share with you over the next few minutes or so. So let's get started, shall we? We're living in a world where very nearly, in fact, he's not very nearly, he is indeed over now, 100 years old. A man can raise over £30 million in a matter of days for our NHS by walking around his garden. Now, I was able to say when we first referenced this, well done, Captain Tom Moore. In fact, he was then made a colonel, an honorary colonel, so it was Colonel Tom Moore. And you know, nobody saw this coming, of course. This fine elderly gentleman with the important stuff on his mind has now been knighted or offered a knighthood, which I believe he'll be taking up as and when able to. No doubt some of you will be sitting in your home office, your bedroom, or as someone we had on our virtual courses recently said, their garden shed. Be interested to know. I should run that as a poll, really, shouldn't I? We hope that the next 40 minutes or so will provide you with some interesting and, dare I say it, even inspiring content and give you some tips and insights to help you navigate your way through what for most of us are pretty troubled waters, and certainly the initial polls would suggest that's the case. We have some common territory and ground in that I understand that many of you are involved in training, possibly consultancy, possibly advisory, as we are. So in a time when the future is uncertain, we're asking, when can we next go to the pub? Can our frontline workers and the country's infrastructure cope with the crisis? They're doing a pretty amazing job so far. And how will this unprecedented time impact on our business? What we can tell you is that every one of these questions will create the need to negotiate. And we're here to help you do just that more effectively if we can. This afternoon we'll spend most of the time in this session sharing insights and tips into three particular themes: data, trust, and confidence. And we will, after a little and talking a little bit about negotiation and conflict and how you handle conflict generally. We're going to run a short Q&A session after that, and Andrew and I, once we've shared these insights, share with you a free offer at the end of this. Hopefully that'll entice you to both stay awake, as Daniel said, and also hang on till the end. We want you to take away something that is practical, something that will help you take control and give you some confidence in your negotiations as commercial enterprises, both as individuals and as organizations. And this is something that we guarantee with all of our training. We want you to take these and hopefully apply them into your world, and we look forward to having a conversation with you about that through the chats in answering some of your questions. So I'd encourage you to pop those questions on here. You're welcome to contact us afterwards as well. Before we do that, let's just do a couple of introductions. I think we've probably covered most of it, but Andrew, I don't know if you want to add anything to Daniel's illustrious introduction.
Yes, it was quite illustrious. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. As Daniel said, my name's AndrewFarquhar, and I've been trying to help people become better negotiators with Scotwork now for over 20 years. I did have proper jobs before I joined Scotwork. I've worked in both the procurement and sales side of the grocery sector within various companies. I've been keeping busy during the lockdown, but like most people, I'm glad that some sense of normality is slowly returning. Richard.
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, I've had a 15-year career or so in the advertising industry. Started in the late 80s. I was then immersed in the first internet bubble at the start of the 90s, and involved in that first great big, I wonder if this internet lark is going to catch on era. And subsequently set up my own business, as Daniel said, and spent some 19 years as an entrepreneur. I then got an opportunity to go on a Scotwork training course, the Advancing Negotiation Skills flagship course, as I know it much better these days. And about 6 years ago did this, and got an opportunity to go and apply the skills that we share on this in my commercial life. And was pretty astounded by the opportunity that being trained in the dark arts, if you like, of negotiation presents in the commercial world. So much so that I, beginning of last year, joined the company, and with Andrew, who's a fellow director, I run the UK business and travel around the world helping massive corporations and individuals alike navigate their way through the complex world of negotiation. Now I'm going to ask Daniel, please, to run the second poll, if you wouldn't mind, my friend. I'm interested to know what your view is on getting 100% of what you want 100% of the time. I should give you a quick heads up that for anyone, in fact, I won't say this until you've all voted. Excellent. Well, there's some bullish players amongst the audience, and well done on you. I'd normally say that anybody that answers the always, you get 100% of what you 100% of your time. So you're either a liar or you're hired, and you can join us as soon as you like. Likewise, and anyone admitting to not getting 100% or 100% of the time, well, you definitely need to come and see us, but we might be able to help you get somewhere. I think the point here is that there is an opportunity to always do better in deals, and we've just done some global research that's identified, I think, 48% of people coming out of negotiations admitting to not achieving what they hoped to in full in a negotiation. Now, it's not unreasonable given that it's a trading process, but it certainly does present an opportunity, and I'm constantly staggered, not really being a professional trainer, but really being a management businessman from the past, at why we weren't trained on this on these skills early on, and I've now tried joined a business where I hope to be changing that and transforming people's positions. Anyway, so thank you very much. You might be interested to know that 6% say that they always get 100% of they want 100% of the time. Don't believe you. 59% said sometimes they do, 29% said rarely, and 6% say never. I should look forward to having a conversation on that if we ever have the opportunity again in the future. So before we get into talking about negotiation, I would like to talk to you about the fact that there are alternatives, of course, to negotiation. And I'm going to tell you a brief story. It's a story about these beautiful things. These are gaff rig catches from the classic yachts, Fife-built yachts, and the little one as well, the sort of the smaller one, the one second back from the front on the right-hand side is a 140 foot, I believe it is, classic yacht called Altair. My little brother many years ago had the opportunity to join it as its youngest member of the crew. And he joined that boat as what they called in those days the nipper. He was the youngest, most junior person, and it was owned by a very successful Swiss retail entrepreneur. And I got a call. I was sitting at my agency desk one Friday afternoon. I got a call from my brother, and he said, Rich, I've got a fantastic opportunity. We've just arrived in the south of France. We're racing in La Nuillard, which is a very famous classic yacht regatta in the 90s. And the boss's mate has just advised that he can't attend, and I happen to be the next person that walked past, and he said I could invite a friend or a member of my family. I got the call, and here was the offer. He said, if you fly down on Sunday night, we will get the company limo to pick you up from Nice airport. We will take you past Port Brumeau down to Saint-Tropez, where we will shower you with champagne and all of the associated parties that were going on at the same time. We will spend 4 days race training, doing sea trials, that sort of thing. And then on the Friday and the Saturday, we will race. And from that, you can then fly back on the Saturday afternoon. All expenses are paid. All of your gear will be provided, which you'll be allowed to keep afterwards. And there'll be an opportunity to meet this Swiss retail entrepreneur. I should tell you that I was working for a very big retail design agency in the commercial context at the time. So I saw the whole thing as, quite frankly, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I rushed upstairs to where the chief executive of the agency was, a lady called Lavinia, and shared with her the brilliant news about this wonderful opportunity and that I wouldn't be around the following week. However, I don't know what it was with the news and how it mixed with the oxygen in the air before it arrived at her ears, but she turned around to me and she said, Richard, you can't go. You have got staff appraisals on Tuesday, we've got a management meeting on Thursday, and you said you had a new business meeting next Friday. You cannot go. Now, this is where I ask you 60 people to turn into consultants for a moment, and I would like you to share with me, it's probably best doing this on the chat if that's all right with you, just a simple 2 or 3 words of how you think I could resolve this conflict. How do you think I could get through? My brother had said, call me back in 30 minutes. It's the hottest ticket in town. How can I resolve this conflict? My boss says I can't go, and I've got 30 minutes to resolve it. Any ideas, people? Now, there we go. Look, the first one, brilliant. Look at this. Look to the long term. I've got do not go. Fantastic. Not the first time I've heard that. Someone else said rearrange the meetings. Put proxies in for meetings. Thank you. Look to the long term. Create a plan for both of you. Quit. I've had 2 quits, 3 quits. I think that's a bit radical, isn't it? Explain the benefits that you're going to her. Bring your team with you. That's radical. Pitch it to her better. I certainly could have done that. Sell her the benefits of you going. Yes, weigh up the benefits, get more information. Rearrange the meetings. Buy Andrew a wig. Thank you. What's in it for her? Now, that is a very interesting question. Thank you, Tracy. Take her along, says Helen. I think that was radical. Did I mention that she hated me? Any more? These are great. Opportunity to develop relations with the new entrepreneur. Well, I'll tell you what, thank you so much. I reckon you've covered about 6 of the 8 things that we would suggest you had as an opportunity. And I'm going to pick up on all of those. Great. And I have to say, some of you even rather funny. So here's what I could have done. I'm going to take them straight from what you've offered. I could try and persuade her. Absolutely. Tell her about the merits of this trip, the opportunity to do the trip. And if I could persuade her as to the merits, like we would in any sales context, there's a very good chance that I might be able to, like a good salesperson would, turn her around to my idea of why it is a good idea to go. And if you can persuade someone in a conflict situation to come round to your side of the argument, we would do that hands over before we do anything else. Some of you have suggested reorganizing things, what we would call problem solving. And problem solving, likewise, is a very common way to resolve conflict. Let's say that, I can rearrange those 2 meetings. I can move the client meeting back. I get to achieve my objective, and I've used problem solving and techniques to deal with it. I think typically in most conflict situations, we try a combination of persuasion and problem solving in order to resolve conflict. But there are risks associated with that. I think persuasion has a habit of, and let's just imagine I'm going Lavinia. This presents a fantastic new business opportunity for the business. This could be the great new account that we've been chasing after. This would be spiritually uplifting for me. I would come back a better leader in the business, and I would be able to share that love across the business. I think there's a danger that persuasion, whilst it can be very effective, also has a habit, and you're going to have to forgive the language here, of turning into bullshit. With problem solving, I think sometimes when we're in a conflict situation, and I think the same certainly applies at home, sometimes we're solving the wrong problem. Sometimes people won't tell us what the real problem is, and we go to great ends to try and resolve that, but don't manage to do so because we're pushing in the wrong direction. It may well be the case, and quite likely, quite frankly, that Lavinia was just jealous of me. Or because she didn't like me, she didn't particularly want me to have any fun. Now, there are some alternatives, and you've come up with those. What's in it for her? I think Tracy had said. In this particular case, well, I don't know. What is the price that I might have to pay? What could I do with Lavinia? Could I offer a lunch? Could I introduce her to some of these? She's a mad keen sailor, by the way. Could I take her with me? Could I pay for a flight and say, listen, I'll tell you what, while you go and hang out in Saint-Tropez, and let's face it, who wouldn't want to do that? Then I'll go and hang around on the boat, and we can discuss top-level management issues in the evening. Now that really is what I would call bribery, probably, although we call it negotiation. Trading, if you like, something in return to get something what you want. If you're prepared to pay the price, then I could end up with a very satisfactory negotiation and get what I want in return. But bear in mind, it does cost negotiation. Another thing I could do, I'm going to take on the ones where you said, quit, 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 quit. I've got 4 quits in front of me here. I don't think that's so radical. What I think I probably could have done is use a technique called imposing your will. I'm sure you've all got customers and possibly even suppliers who sometimes will use the power that they have to say, listen, this is how it's going to be. They inflict the pain unconditionally and tell you how things are going to do. I certainly had clients in the past that behaved like that, and they just said, this is the price we're going to pay, knowing that we didn't have the power to refuse them. But there is a risk associated with imposing your will, and I will come back to that in a moment. Somebody said, don't go. In fact, the first 2 answers I got on here were, if I just scroll up, do not go. It's not the right thing to do. Well, I think sometimes when we resolve conflict, we try to curry favor with the other side. We try to generate goodwill, and we trade in goodwill with the other side. Giving in, well, might well have helped my career, but quite frankly, I wouldn't have achieved my objective. And I think you have to think very carefully about simply giving in and wonder what you're ever going to get back in return. In my experience of trying to trade goodwill in conflict, I find people either have very short memories or they've moved jobs a year later when I'm asking them to accept the original price for something that I've perhaps tried to trade with them. I could have said, well, Lavinia might have said to me, well, I'll tell you what, you can take next Friday afternoon off. I could have come back and said, you must be joking. How about if I come in on Monday morning, I'll do the staff appraisals and anything else I can do to help, and then I'll head off at lunchtime. She comes back and said, the best I can do is mid-morning on Friday. I say the best I can do is I can just leave on Monday night and go 24 hours later. What we're doing there, where there is a single variable, and in this particular case is time, is we are haggling. And haggling is what we do in markets, where we typically end up is somewhere in the middle. We split the difference. And I don't like splitting the difference or meeting in the middle. If I meet in the middle, I look at it nowadays as having given away half the shop rather than a halfway distance. So we have to be careful of haggling, but we can get to a result that we might be able to create some happiness with. We could postpone. Postponement's very common. I bet a lot of you have got email inboxes with stuff right at the bottom that continues to get pushed back, where you just hope that that thing will go away. I certainly used to have those. And postponement sometimes works. Sometimes those things do go away. I could have hidden under my desk and hoped that Lavinia had got invited on a sailing trip or something fabulous next week, and that I would be able to sneak out scot-free the following week. But postponement carries risks. sometimes things can just come back with a bigger problem than they were before. And the final one is what we call arbitration, where you delegate the decision to somebody else. We could have gone to our agency chairman and said, you know, Lavinia, you have 5 minutes first with the chairman, and I'll have 5 minutes with the chairman, and then we'll get him to make a casting decision. In this particular case, that probably wouldn't have been a good idea, because the company chairman was Lavinia's husband. So there we go. Now, for those of you that are interested, so we've talked about persuasion, problem solving, postponement, imposing your will, giving in, haggling, negotiation, and arbitration. I promised I'd tell you what the risk was of imposing your will, which is what I did actually. I went away and had an amazing week sailing on this utterly beautiful boat. The downside, out of a job by Christmas. But I was very glad to have done it. It was an amazing experience. Now, our focus, of course, is on negotiation. And what I'd like to do now is, Daniel, if you're still with us, if you could run the resolving conflict. There we go. That's interesting. We've only got 3 of those. I'll tell you what, drop that. Don't worry about it. We're missing some of the other options on here. So I think we'll probably just end that poll. I was going to ask you where you head to in terms of the most common times that you resolve conflict. Persuasion and problem solving are very common areas where people try and resolve this. We're going to talk about negotiation. And negotiation, as I mentioned to you, does cost. Don't ever think that it doesn't cost. It costs because it is a trading process. And that means we have to exchange things of value, higher value to the other side, but lower cost to us in exchange for things of lower cost to them and higher value to us. That is typically how a negotiation will work out. And because it's a trading process and therefore has a structure to it, it needs a whole set of skills around it. I can't promise, as Daniel was saying, that we turn people into negotiating gurus, but we certainly arm them with the tools, the skills, the structure, and in turn some control and confidence over the process, so that with practice, and I'm learning all the time still, you can certainly hone those skills. So that's how we define it, a trading process. And now what I'm going to do is to get us onto the first of our 3 themes around negotiating specifically in uncertain times. Now, here's the thing. Data drives most negotiations. In a post-virus age, negotiations, wage negotiations, both employers and unions reliant on tons of data covering wage cost, average incomes, regional distributions, unemployment rates, historical inflation rates, and so on, will be affected by the disruption to reliable data caused by the virus. Indeed, the greater uncertainty, the less reliable historical data is as a guide to the future. The modelling currently being done around the world on relaxing lockdown restrictions is producing widely varied decisions, mostly because of poor quality or non-existent data, and how people will behave, it's true to say, is that rubbish data in will deliver rubbish data and decisions out. When the data is unreliable, people fall back on opinion, and boy, have we got plenty of those at the moment. The lack of data because of low testing numbers, opinions about how many people have actually had COVID-19 in the UK range from under 4 million to 40 million, and any of those opinions might be right. We don't just have data, we don't just have the data to know. When Donald Trump, had to get a mention, was asked a few weeks ago which metrics he was using to make decisions, he pointed at his head and said, the metrics in here. Now that's a scary prospect, I'll grant you. But then he went on to say, I can listen to 35 people, but at the end I've got to make a decision. And given the wealth of conflicting data facing many of these experts or leaders in their fields, I think they're right. So in terms of strategic insights, our advice is to share the pain. Defective data makes life more difficult for all parties in a negotiation. So share the burden. Agree which data is unreliable in these uncertain times and negotiate accordingly. For example, the weeks of panic buying of toilet rolls and hand sanitizer will massively skew the data about the demand for these products. Future pricing, stock holding, forward ordering cannot be realistically based on this data by either supermarket buyer or product seller. So new contracts need to reflect this uncertainty. Our top tactic piece of advice is to trade opinions. When data reliability disintegrates, opinions about the future proliferate. If your counterparty makes proposals based on outrageous opinions, trade their opinions for yours. Don't just argue with them. For example, there is an opinion circulating about the value of the average price house in the UK and that it will fall by 30k at the end of 2020. If a buyer demands that discount from a seller, the counter is to agree, but with a caveat that the discount is conditional on that fallen value and redundant if the discount is less. I'm sure you're in a situation where your clients are coming to you and putting pressure on price commitment all around this opinion of the pressure of the current health crisis. Just make sure you can try and trade that. In terms of skill tip, our advice is to repeat, repeat, repeat. In the absence of hard data, fake news is very much harder to identify. If one person tells you that 5G masks cause COVID-19, you scoff. If thousands repeat the lie on social media, it becomes more believable, at least to some people. So if you want to establish your opinion during a negotiation, often called framing, keep repeating it. Classic example is the original statement that the government repeated time and time again. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. There was no data to support this at the beginning of the lockdown. But also beware of opinions from the other side which rely on repetition. Because you say it over and over again, still doesn't mean it's any more right. If you've got any questions, don't forget to submit these on the Q&A, on the chat session at the bottom for Daniel. He's going to collect these and we'll come back to some of these issues. Now, the second theme we're going to talk about is trust. Trust in uncertain times. All of us deal with a level of uncertainty on a day-to-day basis. But when this turns into turbulence, extreme and unprecedented uncertainty, it activates various levels of threat in our brain, where at the highest level of threat, our survival instincts take over from our automatic programs. We talk about threat levels in the brain, levels 0 to 3, from no perceived threat, threat in the broader environment, threat in the immediate environment, and threat is upon us. When we're aware of threat in the broader environment, i.e. when we're aware of COVID-19 in China, we're still able to operate and think well. However, once it arrives in our immediate environment, our fight or flight response is triggered. At this stage, and when the threat is immediately upon us, our thinking is impaired. The effect of our relationships is that we trust nothing, trust no one. Selfishness is caused as a result of our survival button being pressed. Think about panic buying in supermarkets, a perfect example of this. In short-term relationships, it's easier to make unilateral decisions as there is no gained trust. The US cancelling PPE orders from foreign countries, good example. Long-term relationships, again, can break down through selfishness and destroy trust. You think about the Lehman Brothers demise in 2008. Lehman clients brought junk bonds because they trusted the bank and didn't test their assumption that the bank was trustworthy. The problem for the bank is that if they had survived, no client would have ever trusted them again. In terms of strategic insight, our advice is not to assume, I got that wrong, the start point is as negotiators is not to assume anything and test everything. Open your inner curiosity and ask lots of questions. It will make you a better negotiator per se anyway. Ask yourself, how is the current situation affecting their business, the people on the other side of the table? What changes have they or are they going to make? Try and understand the world in which we are operating. By creating an environment where you are interested and concerned and where your behavior is congruent with that, you are more likely to gain trust. When people's honesty is met with self-interest or worse still exploited, it will destroy trust instantly. You think of that senior Scottish medical officer who, trust in the relationship was destroyed when they acted through self-interest by going to their holiday home. You'll see how I skillfully avoided bringing up Dominic Cummings in that example. So in terms of top tactics, well, we've got maybe some counterintuitive advice, but it really, really works. In this heightened state of threat, people are more likely to act selfishly and unreasonably, causing a no or a negative response. This blocks the whole process. It's what we call deadlock. One way to move on and protect yourself is to attempt to give them what they want, but on your terms. Ask yourself the question, can we say yes to the other side with enough conditions to protect yourself and move the process on? The government asked to provide financial safety net for the self-employed. The Chancellor agreed with enough conditions in place, accounts, timeframes, and so on and so forth, to protect themselves at least to a certain level. Just as important, challenge your own reasons for saying no. Is it an emotional knee-jerk response to the other side? When they ask you, for something, let's say that seems a bit steep, rather than just saying no, ask yourself the question, is there a way I can say yes to that? Are there some conditions? Is there something I can scale up to in order to say yes to them? It's a much more powerful thing to do. In terms of skill tips here, I would encourage you to have one eye in the future. What kind of relationships do you want to have in the future? It can take years to build trust and yet minutes, seconds to destroy it by behaving in a way that appears to be selfish or self-interested. Think about your behavior, ask good questions, listen, try and address their issues as well as your own, where there's a potential opportunity in these difficult times to build stronger, more added value relationships. Actually, I think in many respects, a lot of people are being nicer to each other. So don't use that as an opportunity to block those situations, but better to enhance those. So we've covered confidence and trust. No, we haven't covered confidence and trust. Today, so Andrew goes, oh no, I'm doing that. I beg your pardon. Data and trust. And we're now going to hear from Andrew, who's going to talk to us about confidence.
Thanks, Richard. Right, confidence in uncertain times. Generally speaking, confidence levels take a battering during times of crisis. Interesting from the poll, I scribbled down the figures that you completed at the beginning. About half of you reckon or feel you're less confident about the future prospects of your business than you were before the beginning of COVID-19. So about half of you certainly feeling it. And to be honest, this isn't surprising. In March this year, UK consumer confidence plummeted to a level not seen since the financial crash of 2008. And as the slow recovery from lockdown continues, it will likely fall even further. Businesses and consumers are having to grapple with the definition between essential and non-essential purchases. Major expenditure is unlikely to be made until a degree of normality returns. And quite frankly, unless your business is in food retailing, home entertainment, or remote working software like we're using this afternoon, it's likely that times are tough. The question is, how can negotiators best operate in such a confidence-sapping environment? So the first little bit of strategic guidance that I've got for you is just to plan with confidence. Preparation, as always in negotiation, is a crucial component of successful outcomes. In crisis situations, it's vital you understand any trends in the confidence levels of all parties, because as I mentioned earlier, behavior often changes when confidence is low. Then importantly, don't dither, grasp the nettle, and act fast. Dr. Michael Ryan, who's an executive director at the World Health Organization, commented in March this year, speed trumps perfection. He then went on to say perfection is the enemy of good when it comes to emergency management. In other words, in times of stability, with many factors predictable, striving to be perfect seems to be a reasonable goal. In times of crisis, however, when there is no certainty of knowing what lies ahead or the best course of action to take, there's no time for faultlessness. The fear of making mistakes paralyzes us and we end up on the back foot, So be bold with your preparation and then decisive in your implementation. In terms of tactics for you, in terms of confidence, I think you can get a real boost to your confidence levels by being a first proposer. So once you've estimated each party's reading of the uncertainty level, the best tactic is to take proactive control of the negotiation, we think. Quite simply, proposals influence negotiations. So in general, it's better to make a proposal rather than invite one from the other side. Being a first mover shows you have strong confidence in your view of the future. Otherwise, you would have waited before committing. Making proposals allows you to get your numbers and thoughts into play. It aids control of the process and boosts your confidence levels. So remove those inhibitions and tell the other side exactly what it is you want. The skill tip associated with confidence that we've picked for you is just to tell confident tales. Now, generally, when confidence is low due to uncertainty and worry, a useful skill of the competent negotiator, we think, is persuasion. Our capability to weave a coherent and confident narrative of the future will often allay the worries on the other side of the negotiating table, or at least bring comfort to some of them. Do you remember Matt Hancock's repeated delivery of the 100,000 COVID-19 tests by the end of April message, which he continued to deliver despite great skepticism? Or another example, if you remember Boris Johnson's pre-Brexit vote promise of the sunlit uplands ahead. I think we're going to shortly find out how that all pans out. But the point is, repeated delivery of a positive message creates familiarity in people's minds, which in turn generates a sense of cognitive ease. In other words, it's about presenting a good story. And one final tip from me: to find a good storyteller, look for someone who's good at telling jokes, because the skills are the very same. Richard.
Thanks, Andrew. So in summary, if I just look back to those three themes: data, recognize unreliable data, where the other side is reliant on data that you've got a different view about. Try and trade those opinions. Don't just keep arguing about it. You cannot negotiate an argument or an opinion. In terms of trust, well, in these times where our ability to trust is challenged, ask questions, listen to the answers. Try and answer their issues as well as your own. Remember, there's potential opportunity in these difficult times to build stronger, more added value relationships for the future, but an emphasis on the word trade in that particular context. In terms of confidence, from Andrew, we'll take comfort from your preparation. Assess how the other side view the situation and take control by making proposals and paint a positive picture. So we're going to do, we've talked through some insights and tips. I hope you found that interesting. May I ask, Daniel, have you got any questions for us? Does anybody like to ask a question on any of those subjects that we've covered?
Hello, everybody. I'm back. Thank you guys so much for that great talk and great going through of negotiations. I've just written down a few notes myself. I hope everyone else has. Please do, the chat is still open. We haven't had many questions through yet. I'm going to say a few things myself, but please do, while I am, get those questions coming in. I've got a question for both of you, actually. Percentage-wise, how often do you get what you want?
Okay. Is that the best question you've got, Daniel, or is that...
I'm just waiting for people to send in questions. That's one of the questions. Okay.
Well, I mean, what I suppose we would both say that we did, but I mean, certainly what I do is if I can avoid negotiating, I will. So that's the first thing. So I will do my level best to persuade the other side of what the other side, in terms of the merits of the argument. But I think one of the tricks in any conflict situation is to be able to look objectively at how things are unraveling and to read what's going on the other side and not get too sort of caught up in the weeds, so that you can keep asking the questions that you want. Once you've got sufficient information, you can ask good proposals. When you get an answer or a rejection to those proposals, think hard about whether that's a rejection because of the way it's structured or packaged, as we would say, or indeed whether you haven't attributed enough value of it. I think it's pretty rare that anyone gets 100% of what they want 100% of their time in a negotiation, because it is a flexible and fluid process. But in answer to your question, 78.2.
Very accurate.
I think, can I just add on that, Daniel? I think one of the things I did before I joined Scotwork was actually do the course that we run, and I tell you, my chances of getting a better deal or more of what I want increased dramatically after I've done that, because what you begin to realize is negotiation isn't a blocking process. It's not about trying to find 100 ways of stopping people getting what they want. We think it's very much an enabling process. Once you understand that both parties need to kind of get something out of it, you can increase your success rate dramatically.
Brilliant, brilliant. And just a second one from myself. Did you have something to say, Richard?
No. I was just looking at a couple of questions that have come in.
Okay, perfect. Before we answer those, we're just going to go to an infomercial quickly, and then we're going to come back and answer those questions. I just wanted to let you guys know that anyone who is a CPD member, you do have the opportunity for getting on a consultation call. So on that consultation call, we are going to be looking at 5 things. So we'll be looking at 5 things around getting and pivoting your courses to get online. So anyone that is interested in that, please do watch out for the follow-up email of this webinar, in which there'll be a link where you can schedule that call with myself at any time that you like. So please do watch out for that coming soon after this. So let's move on to these questions then. I do have another one just before. How soon do you think someone should send out a proposal? Or is there any specific triggers that someone should look for of when to send a proposal and to initiate that first movement?
Is this from one of the questions that's come in?
No.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's a couple of observations I'd make, which will go some way to answering, I think, Simon's question, which is how do you reconcile the idea that the first person to speak loses with first proposer? Okay. I think that the answer to your question is, I think once you're armed, if you've prepared well for a negotiation and you're very clear on what your objectives are and critically what your limit position is, and you have considered the negotiating collateral, i.e. the other value that you can bring into a negotiation, then I would always advocate making the first proposal. And I would do that as soon as you're confident enough, you've understood what the needs and wants are of the other side, as well as got clarity on your own position, and you've assembled all of the information that you need. Then I think you can then make that proposal, and certainly making that proposal will anchor your position near what we would call your end of the bargaining arena. So it would give you an opportunity to then sort of gain greater control in the negotiation. So I think the answer to your question is as soon as you've got the requisite information to be armed with to get that answer and that proposal on the table.
We've got another question in from Peter Kerr, who asks, what is the process of trading opinions? What is the process of trading opinions?
Well, when people express opinions, it is an expression of what they're thinking. It's their point of view. They can argue as much as they like. If you fundamentally disagree, then it's very difficult to resolve that without doing, I guess, what we do in more common parlance of disagreeing about whose football team's going to win. And that is, you make a bet. You basically trade that opinion. The best examples in a commercial context might be in the insurance industry. I mean, that's based on trading of opinions. I think my house is going to burn down. Well, if you give me £500 every year, If it does, I'll rebuild it for you. We've traded that opinion, if you see what I mean. Sale or return in a commercial context. I think we're going to sell loads of gear. Will you stock it, please? No, we won't. Well, if you don't have to pay for it, then let's agree preferential terms to cover the cost of me funding it sitting in your store against a success side. So you're basically betting against the success. That's how we would see trading opinion. You provide your upside if it comes in on your side of the coin.
Yeah. We've got another question that's coming from Dale Howarth, who asks, what is your view on the media's role and approach to confidence at this time?
Andrew, do you want to answer that?
The media's role in terms of confidence.
Yeah.
I would suggest they are doing possibly what they're supposed to do, which is, challenge and point out discrepancies where they exist.
Yeah,
Not sure it's negotiating.
Yeah. I was going to say it's not really. Well, I'm not sure what the context is in terms of negotiating. I think what they're doing is asking a lot of questions, as Andrew said. I think sometimes those questions are quite pejorative and are less helpful as far as building confidence in the audience. But they're also often important questions that need asking. I think it comes down to the motives behind the questions.
We have a comment, more of a comment from Nikki, who says, as a coach who specializes in working with people who feel bullied, I've just realized how many skills I help people develop that are transferable to negotiations. Thanks so much for the aha moment. So thank you guys on behalf of Nikki.
I think I'll just add to that, because I think it's a very common thing. I think we have, because someone else is asking about, there's a lot of pressure coming from clients to, do training at rock bottom rates. We're under the same pressure too. People are bringing some really tough propositions to us. And I think it's a similar piece of advice, and Nikki will know better than I will. But I mean, I hate bullies. I hate people that behave badly in commercial situations. There's no need for it. We're just human beings. We're all trying to do our job. And the tactics of using bullying and unfair and unnecessary and unkind, quite frankly, behavior in commercial contexts is the advice from our perspective is, first of all, recognize that that's what's being done. They will try and make it personal because they are not very nice people, but recognize that it's being done and recognize that there's plenty you've got to add to the party. Otherwise, you ask the question, what am I doing here in the first place? And I would always try and resist, but not necessarily in a combative way. I would think about that, trying to give them what they want, but on your terms. If they don't accept those terms, well, bad luck. And I think it's critical to understand your limit positions. I think we're in a situation where we might go in going, I can't afford not to do this, this particular deal. I would really urge you to think very, very hard about that position and think, well, actually, I think we can afford to not do it, because if it doesn't meet our minimum criteria, then it would be a mistake to do it right now. So I would recognize it and summarize back to people their bad behavior. If you sometimes hold a mirror up and you say, so just so we're clear, you're asking me to do this, that, and the other. Below my margins, below this, that, and the other. Is that clear? Sometimes if you repeat that back to them, they start to sort of understand how unreasonable they may be.
Yeah. I've got another one. Got a few coming in now. One from Aaron, who says, how do you stay objective and not let that ego voice lead you to believe they're trying to take advantage, or that voice that might be a pushover, saying to be generous? Sometimes I find it hard to stay true to my outcome because they've convinced me on their point. So it's those two sides, I guess, Warren. How do you get that balance?
Effective preparation, I think, is the best answer to that. I think if you know, as Richard's saying, exactly what it is that you're going into a negotiation trying to achieve, which we would recommend you try, and know exactly how much flexibility, if any, you have on the various positions you might be shooting for in a negotiation, then that's the best way to keep you on track. And, you know, one of the things we teach is a process underpinning what's going on when you're when you're negotiating. So if you understand what your objectives are, where you have flexibility, where you don't, and understand and stick to the process that's in play, that should keep you on track and avoid being pulled off to other sides in terms of what the other side actually says to you.
Yeah. Got another one in from Helen. Helen Golding. Many of my clients are looking for training at rock bottom rates, arguing that they are cash strapped and it's less time consuming. So delivering online is less time consuming for the delivery to be made remotely, which is not true, she says. I'm mostly just saying no and selling the benefits of what I give them. But do you have any other good tips?
Well, funny enough, I was just reading that note from Helen. Helen, we're in a not dissimilar situation. I think the transition to virtual world and the new norm is a commercial challenge, often rather than a negotiation one, although the two are intrinsically linked. My advice is to sell a value proposition, not a cost plus proposition. If somebody comes and says it costs you less to deliver because it takes less time, you're doing it from your own home, you're doing it directly, then I would always try and divert them to the value they get from it. And this is one of those kind of classic sort of opinion things really where, and I'll give you a perfect example, our training, which we are confident is the best negotiation skills training available on the planet. We built the course 45 years ago. We've been teaching it in multiple markets around the world, and we have attributed a value to it, and it is that value that we sell it for it. We have now convinced ourselves and many clients, I'm pleased to report over the last 3 months, that the delivery of it virtually can actually be better than the classroom-based alternative. It's a much more intense experience. And so we sell that on the basis that the value is the same. If we could do it in 3 minutes, we'd charge the same price, but it takes 4 half days. And I think you've got to try and sell a value proposition as opposed to a cost plus model. You'll always find someone that can do anything cheaper. But if you say, these are the benefits of what I'm doing, and this is the value, I think in terms of negotiation, then I would always advocate adding value to a proposition rather than discounting back. So adding on additional segments or time or some sort of clinic type sort of context afterwards that's relatively simple for you to sort of put across and try and get the value across the line that way, rather than just going no and potentially sounding unreasonable.
Do you guys see any more questions in the chat that have not been covered yet? Do you see anything that you haven't covered as yet before we move on to your offer?
No. I'm just saying, Nikki's suggesting that I refer some of our clients back to her. You come on one of our courses, Nikki, and we'll have a sensible conversation about that. No, I think. I mean, the other thing I would say is someone saying, you know, taking first mover advantage when it may cost you a pretty penny. You're in control. Remember, you can trade whatever. We always have the power of no. And I think it's confidence, as Andrew said, in good preparation that will stand you in good stead for that. Okay, shall we wrap up our bit, Daniel?
Yes, please go for it, guys. Okay,
we're running a little bit long, so I'm going to give you the 2-minute version here, folks. So here we go. Scotwork has developed over the last 3 months. I have to say it was in development before COVID-19. It's just that the program was somewhat accelerated from about the middle of February in anticipation, or rather in reaction to this situation. But we deliver world-class negotiation virtually, and we've got a very sophisticated environment with which we do that. We think we're the only negotiation skills training organisation to do this to the level of effectiveness that we're doing, and we're very proud of it. We have a portfolio of training We do coaching through half-day virtual skills workshops, so we deal with specific problems. We're very happy to partner with other organisations if anybody has a client that might have a skill requirement that falls outside your remit, and likewise we do consultation. We'd be delighted to make friends with any of our fellow CPD colleagues. So if it's about negotiation, we are the ones to call. Very quick free offer. As Daniel said, they're going to share some content back with you. It's going to come in the form of this ebook, Negotiating in Uncertain Times. It covers it covers the 3 themes that we've talked about today, but there are 3 others, I think 3 or 4 others in there as well. It's quite an interesting read, and I would recommend you do it. If you are an organisation or you have a client that is interested in understanding how good or otherwise they are at negotiating, we have produced an extraordinarily clever, I would say that, but I'm going to anyway, capability tool that allows you to identify against 9 different criteria in an organisation where your strengths and areas for development, we euphemistically and diplomatically refer to further develop an organisation in terms of your negotiation skills. I'm happy to offer 3 companies or referrals from your organisation, and you can take all the credit. You must have a minimum of 20 respondents available to complete an online survey within the organisation, and we can talk about that. So get in touch with us afterwards. And finally, just to say thanks very much for the opportunity, Daniel, especially for the introductions, which has made my afternoon. And it was a pleasure to virtually e-meet. Thank you very much for those of you that submitted the questions, and thank you to my colleague Andrew for working on this with me.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, there you go, guys. Thank you so much to both Andrew and Richard, obviously, for that presentation. I hope you all feel like you've got a lot from that. Just want to remind you all that we are here to support the CPDSO community and wider training community as well. So please do get in contact with any questions. Like I said, we are currently doing consultation calls as well that are looking at your online delivery, basically. So moving things from offline to online. So if anyone does need any information around that, please do get in contact with us. All information from both CPDSO and Scotworks will be sent out in the email. There'll be links to both Richard and Andrew as well in that follow-up email, so you can get in contact with them when you feel so. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us. Have a great afternoon. So that's bye from myself and the CPDSO team and Richard and Andrew. So enjoy your afternoon, everyone, or evening or morning, wherever you are. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.